over several different aspects of imagination and religious controversy behind it, and the fact that it is a biblical reality of God being imaginative, or he's described in the Bible as such. Trying to learn how to experience his kingdom. Not just know that there is a kingdom, not just know that we're part of it because we got baptized, or because we spoke in tongues, or because we joined the church, or because we shook the preacher's hand, but experience something that resembles the kingdom in our daily lives. I think I mentioned last week that there was a Christian counselor and lecturer who came upon a phenomenon as he took a survey asking people from different Christian backgrounds across denominations, how many of you feel loved by God? Not how many of you know God loves you, not how many of you have been told God loves you, but how many of you feel loved? And the percentages of people that answered that question affirmatively within the Christian community was extraordinarily low. A lot of people don't know what that means and how to get there, largely because a lot of people have a hard time knowing what love feels like. That's a complicated issue. If you don't know what it feels like to feel loved, how can you know what it feels like to feel loved by God, whose love transcends what we've experienced on a personal basis? And then our concepts of love get all messed up, and so you find yourself having to try to bridge the gap between what you've experienced and what you know and what you understand and what God's word declares he is and that we can have. And so that's where we're dealing with things, trying not to necessarily figure it all out, but trying to learn how to put ourselves in a position to experience things that are bigger than our imagination. The thing that we hammered on last week and introduced was teleos. That was the Greek word that was the end of love. Talked about concepts of the good life. Everybody in the world wants to have a good life. Everybody through all of history has wanted a good life and always pursued and had some kind of an idea of that. And it is our ideas and our concepts of what makes a good life that drives our passions, drives our actions, and drives our desires. Even if we don't necessarily know what a good life means to us, we've been given something or have something ingrained in us that kind of gives us a concept. It's what shapes our personhood, what drives our decisions, gives emotional depth and dimension and color to experiences. It's what makes pain painful and pleasure pleasurable, what we consider to be a good life. You play football and get knocked around by a 250-pound linebacker and get bruises and bumps and contusions and all of that pain. None of that seems like a good life to somebody that hasn't done it before. But if your idea of good life includes running around getting knocked around by 250-pound linebackers, it's big fun. You hit the gym, you go through the workouts, you feel the pain the day after. After leg day, you walk like you have rebar stuck in your legs. The pain is not necessarily what other people would say is fun. And you wouldn't necessarily call it fun, but you do it because you're a little bit crazy, some people would say. But realistically, because to you and in your life, it's a necessary component. One of the things we focused on, and I didn't have time to really deal with it last week, and we're going to hit it a little bit more today, is that many of the penultimate decisions and actions and paths we undertake are implicitly and ultimately aimed at trying to live out the vision of the good life that we love and thus want to pursue. Say again that many of the penultimate decisions and actions and paths we undertake are implicitly and ultimately aimed at trying to live out the vision of the good life that we love and thus want to pursue. The stuff that we do that doesn't make sense to us, the stuff that we do that really doesn't make sense to anybody else looking at. A lot of those decisions and a lot of those choices, good, bad, or indifferent, regardless of how they work out, are driven by something in us that desires and seeks out a better life than what we have and seeks to pursue after our concept of a good life, whatever it is and however it got there. However, to say that all humans desire the kingdom or a good life does not mean that we all desire the same kingdom. Because the structure of love can be misdirected, there can be many different teleoi. In other words, there are different visions of what the kingdom looks like. The shape of the kingdom is contested, generating very different stories, and thus different kinds of people citizens who see themselves as subject of rival kings. There are many different round tables. And I want you to keep in mind the idea of story. We've talked about pictures. We've talked about images and how images and pictures impact us and have affect on us more than just lecturing facts. We have to understand that every last one of us is a story. Every last one of our lives tells a story. Some of what we look for and some of what we try to drive at is part of our teleos, or part of our good life, is that we're trying to drive and find a happy ending to our story. To our story, to the story of our loved ones. We want to see stories with happy endings, and we make decisions and pursue things that we, and we're going to get into it a little bit more in a second, that we think will give our story a happy ending. I think George Orwell, or was it Orson Welles, said if you want a happy ending, you have to stop the story like this. Because life brings about time and changes, and what does a happy ending actually look like for some of us? Some of us like movies with endings where everything doesn't work out right. We watch a movie and we see everybody, including the dog, survive, and we're a little bit mad that the dog lived. The dog should have died. Well, the dog can't die, that's their family. No, the dog should have died. Because our happy endings, we want something to be more like reality, and we know that in reality, nobody's going back to that dog. I'm not going back to the dog. And I'm not letting anybody around me go back to the dog. Because I can replace the dog.
If the dog wasn't smart enough to get out.
Exactly. Others of us want a more ideological ending. We figure reality is too harsh. We want to see something that makes us happy and hopeful. And so our happy ending includes the dog getting out alive.
Yeah, in your arms.
Yeah, in your arms. That's our happy ending. And so everybody's got a different happy ending, and everybody's got a different concept of what they want their life to look like and how it's supposed to end. And some of it sometimes just doesn't make any sense to healthy people or even unhealthy people. It's tough to understand and reconcile when you have people of different lifestyles and different life expectations. That's why sometimes you have family members you just can't click with, because y'all got your lifestyle and your life expectations and what you look for out of a good life, and I got mine, and the two of them just cannot coexist in the same space.
Yeah.
And we try to make it coexist in the same space because they're family, but somehow or another, even if we don't necessarily do anything to them, who we are, what we represent, what our story represents, the possibilities, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, the possibilities that our story represents makes them uncomfortable and challenges them. There are many different round tables. This truth accounts for a great deal for the divergence in priorities and the choices manifested in society. It's worth noting that nobody takes an action or chooses a path that they ultimately believe is going to result in their misery. If nobody does something thinking this is going to make me miserable, they don't sign up for it.
Well, sometimes people, that's all they know.
Okay, you think it's going to make them miserable.
No, I would hope it would.
You hope it wouldn't, but you see the end of it, and you know it's there. But that person in the moment making that decision doesn't think, oh, if I do this, it's going to wreck the next 20 years of my life.
No.
Nobody makes those choices thinking that it's going to be destructive at the time that they make them. It may seem odd to some people to see a grown man spending money on Jordans and rims while living in low-income housing. It might seem equally odd to others to see somebody living in a 5-bedroom, 8-bathroom home eating tomato soup for dinner every night because they don't have money for a full refrigerator. Two different extremes, but in both cases, the choices on how they spend their money is a reflection on how they imagine a good life, or possibly the best life available to them at that time. The man who continues to date a woman that constantly cheats on him and disrespects him, or the woman who continues to take care of her man that's unemployed and refuses to look for a job, often do so because they have deemed this individual to be a critical component of what they want to do as a good life. And it's not necessarily always the person themselves, it's the man. I need a man for a part of my good life picture. Includes a man being there, includes a woman being there. And the woman's supposed to look like this, and this one's close, but not quite, but they're close. So we're going to take this one, and eventually if I put in enough work, I'm going to end up with what I want in my picture. Why do they stay? Oftentimes, it's not the person themselves rather than the place that they hold that vision that makes them difficult to walk away from. You ever tried to, Lord help me, get people to get out of bad situations and dysfunctional, unhealthy relationships, dating or otherwise, friendships or whatever it is? It's worse than pulling teeth, and they will turn on you to defend that which is destroying them.
So true. Yes.
When you try to pull them away, that's just their partner is not necessarily what they want. Nobody wants a dude that's going to hit them upside the head. Nobody signs. That's not what anybody says. This is what I want. When you put your wedding book together or whatever as a little girl, and nowhere in that equation is somebody going upside my head. When the man envisions raising a family, nowhere in there is a woman that disrespects me and steps out on me. That's not part of it. But there's a person there. And this person that I have attached myself to, I've projected and invested this idea of what a good life looks like. And I don't leave them because if I leave them, I got nothing to go on. At least getting this person gets me within the vicinity. It's not who I want, but there's a person there. The good life vision has a person there. It's not him. He's not treating me the way I want. But if I love him enough and stick with him, stick with her, eventually we're going to get there. This is why women will notoriously return to abusive relationships even after they get away from them. Previously, we talked about the power of pictures. In cases of abuse, the thought is that it tells a better story to go back and work it out than to walk away and be alone. That's ultimately what is behind a lot of that. It tells a better story. It has the potential. I mean, of me being a superhero because I saved this person from themselves. And I endured a bunch of stuff in the name of love and in the name of whatever ridiculous nonsense they want to play. And the story's better, depending on where you stop the story, if I go back and fix them than if I walk away and be alone. Because if I walk away and I'm alone and the story ends there, then that's a terrible ending in their mind. It's further away from their idea of what the good life is. The picture of a man fixed by the love of a good woman or vice versa is a romantic, teleological notion burnt into the minds of many. Tragically also, images of mothers, aunts, cousins being side chicks or being subjected to cheating and disrespect and abuse also tend to be burnt into the psyche of us growing up as a part of a life to be endured on the path to a good ending to the story. So we wonder, where do these people get these notions of what a good life looks like, and that putting up with this is what a good life looks like? Well, if you grow up seeing it, and eventually your parents end up okay, it stamps an image in your mind. If you grow up enduring it and seeing a man treated a certain way, or seeing a man treat a woman a certain way, or seeing a person who is a hustler and takes advantage of everybody around him, pictures. You may not remember all the details, and you may not necessarily think about the affect that it has on other people, but the pictures are burnt in your mind, and you figure if they got by and it was good enough for them, then it's not that big of a deal when I get to there. Most self-destructive activities, such as substance abuse, remaining in abusive relationships, aligning oneself with gang activity, financial recklessness, eating disorders such as anorexia, drug dealing, and most other choices that are clear to us as bad ideas or ill-advised, are either meant to avoid pain or pursue a good life. Almost any bad decision you see somebody make is one of the two. Either they're trying to avoid pain, whether they realize it or not, or they're pursuing a good life by whatever standard that they may measure. And they may not even necessarily be aware of it. The source of onlookers may wonder in befuddlement what good could possibly come from such life decisions. What good could possibly come from a life ripping around the streets, from selling drugs, from going back in abusive relationships, from taking heroin, from being addicted to this stuff? What good could possibly come of that? How can those decisions turn into something that's a good life? The source of that disconnect, the reason it doesn't make sense to us, is because our idea of a good life is completely different than theirs. Our idea of the kingdom is completely different with theirs. A man who is raised in the streets may see the best his kingdom has to offer is having some Jordans and a bunch of women. When you come up in the street, sometimes your kingdom, the best that it has to offer, is that life that some of us look on and say, what are they doing? Why don't they pursue more than this? Where's their job? Where's their initiative? Why are they still sleeping on their grandmother's couch at 40, 50 years old? Where's the get up and go? For some of them, the best life that they can envision in their kingdom is that life, just surviving and getting by. A man raised in, conversely, a man on Wall Street may see the best practice of the best his kingdom has to offer as getting more, constantly getting more. On Wall Street, that's actually, I thought it was a very powerful line from a movie. I think it was Wall Street 2. I don't know if anybody saw Wall Street, but Wall Street 2. A student asked the apprentice asked the master, the trader, how much is your number? Everybody's got a number that they want to retire on. And this man's number was more. Doesn't matter how much I get, I always want more because I came up on Wall Street. This is the life we live. And consequently, the consequence of that is that they end up doing illegal, sneaky, crooked things to try to get more, because that's what the best that they have to offer looks like. A woman from the projects may understand being a side chick and getting her bills paid is the best her kingdom has to offer. A woman from the Hamptons may see being kept by a wealthy man, however grotesque his character, as the best of her kingdom. Whatever the story is, every bad decision is an attempt to either avoid pain or find pleasure. So getting back to the statement, many of the penultimate decisions and actions and paths we undertake are implicitly aimed at trying to live out the vision of the good life that we love and thus want to pursue. We ask ourselves, what was I thinking when I did that? A lot of times we weren't thinking. We talked about the fact that we're not thinking things first. We're feeling things, and we have a desire for a certain lifestyle, and we make decisions in our youth and sometimes in our middle age and adult life, geared at trying to get to whatever we think that is. One of the biggest challenges for effective recovery out of such lifestyles is deconstructing their kingdom and evoking within their imaginations a better kingdom in which they can partake. Any questions or comments? He wants to talk a little bit. When you try to deal with people that have cyclical issues, they keep making the same mistake over and over again. They are addicted to the drama. They're addicted to the substance. They're addicted to the bad relationship. One of the first things, the most challenging things that we have to do to be effective in dealing with that is deconstruct their kingdom. Because they're making these decisions in pursuit of a good life. They're driven by their teleos. Well, what you have part of dealing with that, and you can do all of the behavioral modification programs that you want to, and tell them, we're going to regiment your day, and we're going to pick you up. I remember we, and my mother tried to, when I was a kid, my dad and my mother happened to pick up the phone one day at church, and on the other end was somebody who was trying to recover from cocaine addiction, crack cocaine. And we would take him, and we'd spend time with him, and my dad moaned. I say we because sometimes he would take me along to pick him up or take him out to dinner or whatever, but I had him over the house and talked with him and worked with him and tried to come up with, he was in the Salvation Army at the time, staying there. And he got a job, and he was terrified of his first paycheck because he was a crack addict. He knew, as soon as I get this money, I'm scared that when I get this money, I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy some stuff. And Dad came up with a plan. I'm going to be here at such and such a time. This is where time to get off of work. This is what time the paycheck is handed to you. I'm going to be there, I'm going to pick you up, I'm going to take you where you need to go, so that way there's no way of anything happening in between. And when he got there, dude was gone. Lost track of him for years, I think. You go through the steps and the process and everything, but if at your core, the world that caused, or the world that you lived in under that dysfunction has not been deconstructed and replaced with a different world and a different good life that you decide is more worth committing to, the chances of falling back in there are very low. And that's not just today. This is one of the things that Jesus does in his ministry. We've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount. And we talked last week about the next step from the 5th chapter. And I suggested that, or asked you all to take another look at the 6th chapter and deal with a specific passage of that I'll read starting at the 19th verse, because we don't have time to go through all the chapter. It says, "Don't store up treasure here on earth, where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven, where the moths can't and rust cannot destroy, and the thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be also. Your eye is like a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is healthy, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is unhealthy, your whole body is filled with darkness. And if the light you think you have is actually darkness, how deep that darkness is. In other words, if you can't tell the difference between light and darkness, your darkness is very, very simple. No one can serve two masters. You will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. This is why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food and drink or clothes to wear. Isn't life more than food and your body more than clothing? Look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for your heavenly Father feeds them. And aren't you more valuable to him than they are? Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? And why do you worry about clothing? Look at the lilies of the field and how they grow. They don't work and make clothing, yet Solomon in all of his glory was not dressed as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for wildflowers that are here today and thrown into the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith? So don't worry about these things, saying, what will we eat and what will we drink and what will we wear? These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers, but your heavenly Father knows all your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. The words Jesus espoused in Scripture were delivered, and I mentioned this last week. Jesus didn't speak accidentally or randomly. The words he spoke were delivered deliberately and purposefully. Accordingly, it was not an accident that prompted this discussion. A good student of Scripture would take a moment to consider what would have motivated Jesus to deliver this admonition. So since we want to be good students, what do you think, or what would you imagine would have caused Jesus to go along and have this conversation with them, or give them this instruction? He's talking to, yes?
He's talking to somebody that's just worried about all the materials and stuff like that.
Okay.
He's worried about just what they have, what they can get, not worried about what it is right now.
Any idea why people were worried about that
At the time, or
at the time?
I don't know.
Okay, that's a good answer. Very good answer.
Not that time.
So he's talking to them about the kingdom. This is a continuation. So you take Matthew 5, 6, and 7 as one work, one related and connected work. And he's talking to them about the kingdom. And we said last week, he's telling them that the kingdom doesn't look like what you think, what people have told you it necessarily looks like. And in the course of discussing that, he gets some material stuff, people being worried about stuff. And to them, for us, we get stuff because we like stuff. It's fun to have stuff. For them, it was a little bit deeper than that. He didn't necessarily write this with the thought primarily of addressing a commercialized American society. They had an issue of their own with stuff that was a little bit different. In that society, and the people he was addressing, great wealth was evidence of great honor, great blessings, and great righteousness. They took acquisition of having a bunch of stuff to mean, and we talked about before, that the blessed people were the people who had a bunch of stuff, the people who were well-to-do and had fine clothing, and those were the ones that God clearly liked. And so we talked about what a shock it was when he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. That doesn't make sense, because the kingdom of God is supposed to go to the rich folks and the people that have stuff. So he gets back to, almost cycles back to this theme and this idea of the well-being, the material well-being of a person, not necessarily being as important as we think it is. Remember that we talked about great honor, great blessings, and great righteousness. One of the things that we have dealt with in the past is that honor to them was a person's claim to value and the person and the public's agreement of that claim to value. It wasn't just I'm an honorable person of integrity. It was I'm valuable to society, and society says, yes, you are valuable to me. And the most clear demonstration of that is somebody who is wealthy. If they're wealthy, of course they're beneficial to society. They have stuff, and they must have great honor, and God is going to bless them. And so the idea of living that life and having that stuff, even though there was no economic mobility then. Back then, you couldn't start low class and end up upper class. There was no, if you were born broke, you was going to die broke. And most people died broke, because most people, and if you were born wealthy, you were going to die wealthy. There was no room for movement there. But what he's actually talking about is, what they fantasize about, what they dream about. What is the stuff and the source of their dreams? They would look at the righteous or the wealthy and assume that they were righteous and assume that they were honored and aspire and desire to have that. That's why, and I added the bold there, where a person's heart is, or treasure is, there his heart is also. Wherever you put your treasure, there the desires of your heart is. He's trying to get them to deal with this worldview that says me having a bunch of stuff makes me honorable and righteous. And so my value to God is somehow attached to the stuff that I got. I can make a correlation or a link between them. Believe it or not, and we don't necessarily appreciate this because we grew up in Christianity and we've grown up listening to the Bible, but Jesus was a radical. I don't say that, but Jesus was radical, and those of you who grew up 50s, 60s, 70s understand the word radical way more than I do. But Jesus was a radical in the way that in the things that he taught and the way that he went about doing things. Much of his teaching was diametrically opposed to the images or the pictures that people carried with them. Here he teaches that stuff is not as important as people believe it to be. He points to lilies and ravens that are more well-dressed and have more than even their great King Solomon. Solomon was the greatest king next to maybe David, but in terms of material wealth, nobody had more than King Solomon in Israel's entire history. And he points to lilies of a field and said they're dressed better than Solomon. He points to ravens and says they have more to eat and are better provided for than the greatest king that you could imagine. And nobody knew Solomon. They heard the stories. And so he's pointing to and trying to plant a different picture of the kingdom as a place where material needs are met by God's providence, and that providence is much greater than the wealth amassed by the chosen ones. These statements to those who never experienced decadence or abundance drove them to try to imagine what could possibly be better than what Solomon had. I don't know who the wealthy family is anymore. At one point, you have Rockefellers, you have Kennedys, you have, Gates, the big money people. And you say that that there is an amount of wealth greater than what Donald Trump has. $10 billion. I have no idea what $1 billion feels like. I can't imagine what $10 billion look like. And you're telling me that in the kingdom, I am better provided for than if I had $10 billion. What could that possibly look like? What could that possibly mean? It's a stretch of the imagination. I can try to imagine, based on the stories that I've heard, what Solomon was like. But you're telling me that the lilies and the birds are cared for better than, and provided for better than Solomon was. And that in the kingdom, I'm more important than that stuff, and so I'm going to be better taken care of than if I was king. What in the world does that feel like? What does it look like? Some of us wonder and wrestle with that today, and that's where you get the bickering and debating over prosperity, and we've talked about that some. But he's painting a picture. The presentation, and we're going to come back to this, and it's one of the things we've been talking about. The presentation stretches the imagination of the people beyond what their experience allows them to entertain as reasonable or realistic. He's talking about something that is completely outside of experience and outside of reality. To understand and get what he's talking about, you have to stretch your mind past what your life experience and what your cultural experience and what your personal anecdotes have entertained as is possible, is realistic. Because our life experience tells us that one standard of living is what's realistic and what's possible for us. And then here comes God trying to tell you abundant living and experience of abundant life stretches and presses the boundaries and the outsides of what that is. This began by deconstructing the notions of the kingdom that he carried with him. So what Jesus is doing in here is taking something that they believed that was deeply ingrained in their society about the value of stuff. And the people that had stuff were more valuable to God. And he says, you're more valuable than the lilies of the field, who have more than King Solomon does. He's challenging their beliefs and the way that they understand the world and the way that they think the kingdom works. He's breaking down their idea of the good life and building something else that's better. Hard to believe, hard to imagine, but telling them wherever you think the kingdom is, there's something greater than that. Whatever you've been told by your mother, whatever you saw your grandmama do, whatever you saw your dad do, whatever patterns and histories that you've seen, and the best that we've ever done is somebody graduating high school, or the best that we've ever done is somebody getting a college. There's something bigger. There's a better quality of living to be experienced in the kingdom. The questions or comments? Okay, move. The question remains, where did they get these ideas? Where did they get the idea that the rich folks were blessed?
Pretty much, when you've been labeled that you are like superior and you got more, and considering the majority of us, which would have been peasants,
Mm-hmm.
it would have been just a natural thought they had everything there. You know, they pure in everything they had.
Right.
But well, I always, from what I've read though through the years, there has always been that I guess the richness and the power that the people held over the lower class people or whatever. And I always thought that it might be where there were some that were poor that got that opportunity through some of the rich people to live better, but not consider themselves rich, but have a more normal life.
When we talked about grace and having a proprietor
Yes.
doing things for you, that's one way that you could. But you experience it.
Yeah.
They may not ever have to tell you you're less blessed, but when they turn their nose up at you your whole life,
Yes.
it sends signals, it sends messages,
Yes.
it sends ideas. You know, I don't want to go there. But you can be, nobody necessarily has to call you out your name to make you feel like something other than what you are.
Oh, no, that's true.
The way that you can be in the workplace and know who the movers are and who the nobodies are just by the attitudes that are demonstrated, or within the school system, or you can see it, you can feel it, you can breathe it sometimes. These people were born into it. How did they get this idea? Like you said, they grew up in it. They were born into that society. They were born into a society that had that notion. Where it began and where it started from doesn't matter. They were born with an idea of a good life that said that the rich people were the ones who were going to have a good life and the poor people were garbage and were useless. Everybody emerges from the womb into a cultural identity with a familial identity, with a social identity, an economic identity, a theological identity, all of which amalgamate into a composite image of what it means to live well. So when you're born, the minute the doctor smacks you on the button, you take your first breath, you are born into a cultural identity, family identity, social identity, an economic identity, a theological identity, and all that stuff put together affects and combines to send messages and implant ideas or create ideas that give you an idea of what a good life looks like. That's a lot to think about. You just figure a person's born in, and I was born and then I went through. You don't realize I was born into a context. Before knowing what anything was, before my eyes could see color. I was born into a context and an environment. Good, bad, or indifferent. It seeps into our pores. It infiltrates our psyche through the sights, the sounds, and the interactions that we experience. as we relate with the world on a daily basis. This is not the stuff of thought. I didn't sit and rationalize it. I experienced it. I didn't sit and sit and pontificate and come up with logic and wonder. At some point in time, somebody has a thought and they challenge the status quo, and then society's there to try to smack them back down. But you're born into a specific set of parameters. And when you put all of it together, it comes up with a picture that you didn't even actually, nobody asked you what you thought. You were born told, and this is, using the biblical society, if you were born broke, you were going to die broke. That sets a trajectory for your life and an expectation for your life that nobody ever gave you a choice and had a conversation with you and asked you what you want to do. You were born someplace, that sets an expectation of what's going to happen, and everything that you do on your life and what you expect of life is based on this understanding of where I am and what I'm going to do. What does the good life look like? How did they get that idea of what a good life looks like? They were born into it. It was no different for the people. Jesus spoke to a people born into a system of intending the world that affected their hopes, dreams, and aspirations. They heard songs and anthems. They played games. They told stories from the infancy through their childhood into adulthood, which created the world around them and gave birth to boundaries of their anticipation and their expectations in life. Deep within their cardia is a Greek word that refers to the heart and the gut. It's not just an emotion. The prevailing understanding, I'm about to get off on a tangent, but the prevailing understanding of the way that the body worked at the time was that the mind, the heart, and the stomach were all one combined network. And that all of it together constituted the essence of a person. It wasn't just stuck in the mind. We understand that the essence of a person is in the brain, and now they've come to understand that there are many nerves going back up to the brain as there are from the stomach, as there are coming down from the brain into the stomach, so which one's controlling which? It's much more involved. You've got as many input receptors as you do output. So there's a loop there. They're feeding off of each other. The heart, the stomach, they're kind of, let's move on. They believed these people believed, the Jews believed that the image that they were born into of the good life was the image of the kingdom, but it was distorted. It was not God's kingdom. Now, as much as we may think of ourselves as self-determined and individualistic, and that we're exempt from predetermination, we would be absolutely wrong. For some of us, we figure I charted my own course. I made my own decisions. I did what I wanted to do, and this is why, You made some decisions, you made some choices, but there were things driving the choices and decisions, and this is one of the things that we continue to hammer on, that were precognitive before you actually thought about them. Your rational mind knew you had absolutely no business doing it, but there were some influences that drove the behavior that, unless God comes in and intercedes or intervenes, your desires drove your actions. And what we desire out of life is not always what we just up and decide we want. Sometimes it's things that we're told we're supposed to want. Sometimes it's things that we're influenced or like we said, it seeps into our pores. We're born into a culture. We're born into a family. We're born into a set of family values and principles. And this is how the Amish do stuff. Or this is how the Wallaces are. And the Timurs will bulldoze somebody's house if they make a man. And we're just born into specific cultures and ideas and family systems. This family's a set of hustlers. We run the streets.
Yeah. Right.
We're born into our value system. I don't care about rims. You've never seen me spend big money on rims, but for somebody, the only way you know you got something is if your car got rims on it. That's not me, but them, that's what they do.
Right.
That's who they are.
Exactly.
And nobody told them, they didn't sit and think about it. They were exposed to images and ideas that drive them. Modern Americans are indoctrinated into social religion in much the same fashion. We're going to use a very rudimentary example as we, because I'm not going to get through all of this. But we're going to use a very rudimentary example of one of America's great cathedrals. Within its walls is a religious proclamation that does not traffic in abstract ideas or doctrines, but in this cathedral is offered to the imagination pictures and statues and moving images. While other religions are promising salvation through thin, dry media books and messages, this new global religion is offering embodied pictures to the redeemed that invite us to imagine ourselves in their shoes. Imagine ourselves being different than we are. and thus willingly submit to the disciplines that produce the saints evoked out of their icons. This temple offers a rich embodied visual mode of evangelism that attracts us. This is a gospel whose power is beauty, which speaks to our deepest desires and compels us to come not with moralisms, but rather with an invitation to share in their vision of the good life. As we pause to reflect on some of the icons that are outside of one of these chapels, we're invited to consider what's happening inside. More properly, we're invited to taste and see. But we are greeted by a welcoming acolyte who offers to shepherd us through the experience, but also has the wisdom to allow us to explore it on our own terms. We come looking, not sure what to look for, but expectant, knowing that what we need must be there. And then we hit upon it. Combing through the racks, we find that experience and offering that will provide us with fulfillment. At other times, our worship may be more intentional, directed, and resolute. We have come prepared for just this moment, knowing exactly why we're here in search of exactly what we need. In either case, after spending time focused and searching in what the faithful call the racks, with our newly found holy object in hand, we proceed to the altar, which is the consummation of worship. Behind the altar is the priest who resides over the consummating transaction. This is a religion of transaction, of exchange and communion. When invited here, we're not just invited to give, we're also invited to take. We don't leave this transformative experience with just good feelings or pious generalities, but rather we leave with something concrete and tangible, with newly minted relics, as it were, that are themselves the means to the good life embodied in the icons who have invited us into this participatory moment in the first place. And so we make our sacrifice, leave our donation, but in return receive something with solidity that is wrapped in the colors and symbols of the saints and the seasons. Anybody have any idea what I'm talking about?
Shopping.
Boom. Say it again.
Shopping mall, Target.
Shopping mall. Think about it. You go there, you look at the windows, you see the mannequins, you see the advertisements, you see these clothes, you see the outfits that this would be cute, that would be cute. You see people look happy wearing the outfits and the clothes that would be cute and they're cute, and you come in and you don't necessarily, women are good at it. The men, we go, we know what we want, we grab it, go.
I just
We've envisioned. But women, y'all know how y'all do. I used to go, I'm not gonna start talking about that, that's personal, I've been traumatized, mom knows more.
Lord, forgive me.
You ever take a 5-year-old to a shopping trip at Hickeys?
God.
Ah! With my grandmother and my cousin, all of which women, shopping, looking around at racks.
Is there anywhere to sit?
Not really.
Any sports?
No.
No sports magazine?
No.
And now
No.
they're 5 years old at that.
Maybe I could have a toy with me. But you run, look, and this and that, and you don't know what you're looking for, you're just looking. But when you find it, you know it. And you buy it, and you go away. Yes?
I have a goal when I go.
Yes, we do.
Yes, as men most do.
Oh, good.
We go get what we get and come back.
But very few people would think of the shopping mall as a place of teleological programming, or programming for the good life. Yet there is a lot communicated in this cathedral. The mall presents an implicit vision of a kingdom with stories embedded in its practices. It envisions the good life and compels us to become a certain people with a certain love. The mall is a sort of intensification of a wider web of practices and rituals associated with consumerism. In that respect, you could say that the mall's evangelism is its marketing, television commercials, billboard, internet pop-ups, magazine ads, or the mall's outreach ministry.
But you get in there, excuse me, and the music.
Yep.
Because certain stores might have a certain music and draw you there,
Yep.
and you spend $100 more than you planned on spending. Well, if you got it.
And other stores have music that make you not want to go in there, but that appeals to the people that they're trying to get at.
That's true.
The rituals and practices of the mall and the markets are tactile and visceral. They capture our imaginations through senses of sound, taste, and touch, even smell.
Yeah.
The hip, happy people that populate the television commercials are moving icons of consumer gospel, illustrations of what the good life looks like.
Yeah.
We see these embodiments of these ideals again in the icon-like mannequins that are in the window walls. The mall communicates its story, not by passing out tracts, not by handing out or by giving lectures, but through visual embodiments of a happy life. They are slow and often surreptitiously absorbed into our cardia, into the very nerve center of how we orient ourselves in the world. They are making us into certain kinds of people without realizing it.
That's true.
Where do we get our ideas of the good life? Where did the people in the Bible get their ideas of what the good life was? We're born into it. Where do we get our ideas? You turn on the TV, you have an internet pop up. You see these things. You're fed, you experience these images, and you never think. It's not a thought process, but it's telling you something about what a good life looks like. You turn on BET, you see Real Housewives of Stupid People. You see, you see this stuff. And implicit, without it ever actually saying, this is what a good life looks like. You wonder, what would it be like to be able to blow that kind of money?
Or be in that situation with all that money. I think
Right, what would that be like? That would be great. What if I didn't have to worry about how I was going to pay for my medicine this month? What if I didn't have to worry about this? That would be wonderful. That's what a good life looks like. That's how I want my life to be. This is implicit. Good life. You have something with.
Oh, yeah. You know, there's actually a T-Pain song that's just like, welcome to the good life.
There is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk just briefly about the visions that come to us through the mall. There's some things that are at play there that we don't necessarily think about.
True.
Given the smiling faces that peer at us from beer commercials and the wealthy people who populate sitcoms and reality shows, we're sometimes prone to think that the culture of consumerism is one of unbridled optimism. Everybody's happy and everything's good and they're trying to help us be happy. But this misses an important element of a mall ritual. In its own construal of the brokenness of the world, which issues not on confession but consumption, in a way it's the mall's definition of sin. It's real superficial. The point is this: implicit in those icons, happiness and pleasure and fulfillment, is a unstated idea that that's not me. You see these images, they're showing you what's supposed to be a good life. And the unstated idea behind it is, I don't have that. I'm not there. That's why I just said, what would it be like not to have to worry about how I'm going to pay for this? I'm not there. That's not me. It induces an idea that what the good life is, I ain't got it. I'm going to go buy something to get it. I see images on billboards or on Facebook or on sitcoms, and while they never say it, it's the implicit recognition that seeps into my adaptive unconsciousness. Everything seems to work out for these people. You watch these shows, you watch these television, everything works out. Their life isn't without struggles, but they seem to have family and friends enjoying them and helping them overcome adversities. And they sure have nice accessories. Look at that grill that the man has, a big chrome barbecue grill that I can just go and put an entire slab of beef on and cook, and then they go in a man cave and sit down and enjoy it with the 80-inch TV and watch the game. It would be great to have that stuff. What does a good life look like to me? Where do I get my idea of a good life? It would be great to have that stuff. I wish I could do that. The girl on the cell phone, she sure seems on the cell phone commercial, sure seems pleasant. I wish I could have people that treated me that way. The billboard mom seems like she's really got it all together. Her kids are smiling and they're remarkably quiet, obedient, or at least they're quiet. I wish I had that minivan with that DVD player so my kids would sit and act like that and I could be happy. Their images of happiness, fulfillment, and pleasure are insinuating something. This isn't you, they tell us, and you know it, and so do we. What is covertly communicated to us is the disconnect and difference between their lives and our own, which often doesn't look or feel nearly as fulfilled as these images do. On the one hand, those ideals draw on power of authentic human desire for friendship, joy, love, and play. On the other hand, they also tend to implant and exaggerate less laudable ideas, focusing on particular conceptions of external beauty that are culturally relative and impossible to achieve, being the products of digital manipulation, a supposedly ideal body type that can only be achieved artificially, are means to impress upon us a sense of lack, thereby engendering a powerful sense of need that would otherwise be absent. And we are going to wrap there. I've got a little bit more. We're going to talk more about shopping malls next week, and then talk about a little bit more substantive things that happen, that we're exposed to, that we have no idea about, that drive what we think is good life. And so why did I spend $175 on a pair of shoes that I'm gonna wear once a week? Maybe.
That won't last forever.
It won't last forever. What in the world would possess somebody to spend $2,500 on a suit when there's a $200 suit in the rack?
Because of the fit sometimes.
Sometimes because of the fit, but
Because some of the big boys can't just pop in and get a
yeah,
$200 suit.
I was quite indignant when the culture shifted to skinny jeans and skinny ties. I'm not built for that. I can't wear a skinny tie. I look like somebody took an ink pen and just drew down my torso.
Jeans, can you just like buy a size smaller than what you should be wearing?
I don't understand the concept, but we're big men. But the culture shifted, and now they want us, those of us who aren't built for that, to think it's something wrong with us.
Mm-hmm.
If your clothes don't fit you with that model, and that's what everybody's wearing now, you need to go on a diet. Work out 4, 5, 6 times a week. No, if you can't fit it, it's something wrong with you. It's the cultural messaging that drives what we think is acceptable, how we see ourselves, and there's a lot more factors. Family, that's a very superficial factor, even though it's very, very pervasive. But family messaging, neighborhoods, schools, what we see, what we experience, what messages are communicated to us through teachers, through people that are supposed to love us, people that are supposed to care about us, give us an idea of what we see out of them and how we see them live their life, and what we can expect when we see our friend. Those are where reality really hits and shapes us. And so what do we do with that when our idea of a good life and the Bible's portrayal of the kingdom don't sync up? And how can I get myself to expand my imagination when the Bible tells me that I can rejoice in the Lord always, and I don't feel like rejoicing, or my circumstances, there's nothing to rejoice about because I've got all of these things going on? How can I experience a life where I can have peace that passes all understanding? How can I experience these things that the kingdom says? I got too much stuff going on, and it is beyond my imagination to be able to experience godliness with contentment. Or if I'm not there, if the Bible says that I can experience a better quality of living, how can I find within myself the motivation, the aspiration to actually say, if it says I can have it, I'm not going to settle just because the world's vision of the good life tells me that's not realistic. That's where we're headed. And how do we get past that? We have to start changing some pictures in our lives, and changing pictures of what we think the kingdom looks like, and changing pictures of who we think we are, and what our photo album of our life tells us we are. So that's where we're headed. Any other questions or comments before we wrap this up?